All right, hey guys, we're out here at the Anza Borrego Desert. This is we went to the ocean, we visited the estuary, we have visited a scrub oak forest, and this is our fourth environment. We're looking at a desert, and there are two types of deserts. There's a high desert and a low desert, and the Anza Borrego is a high desert, as you can tell by the amount of mountains in the background, but also because of the dragon that you see, the sea serpent that is here out in the desert. These are actually sculptures that are found right here at the Anza Borrego Desert, and if you come on out here, there's, I don't know, there's T-Rexes, there's camels, there's chickens, there's elephants, there's all kinds of stuff out here you guys can see. But we're going to investigate the desert here and talk about the plants and the animals that live right here at the Anza Borrego Desert. Alright guys, so the desert here at Anza Borrego is a rain shadow desert, and if you look you can see the mountains and how the clouds are kind of stacked up on the other side of the mountains, and now we're in the shadow of those mountains, and the shadow means that the rain, if there's any rain in those clouds, they'll dump on the other side where the clouds back up on top of the mountains and fall on that side, and then leaving this side dry. And then if you look at the sky just out to the east of us, and it looks a lot less cloudy because they just don't make it out this far. Okay, so here we are out in the Anza Borrego Desert, and what you're going to be seeing out here is a lot of plants, and you're not going to see a lot of animals. And all the different environments that we've been looking at, there are some animals, a lot of birds and things like that, but the animals that are found in the desert are often nocturnal, meaning they come out in the later evening, and some of them at this time of year when it's cold, this is February, they hibernate. And the thing about hibernation is that they can live inside a burrow or someplace for a long period of time, and they'll come out in the spring. So we're going to be seeing a lot of plants and not so many animals. Hopefully we'll see something in the animal kingdom, but maybe not. We'll just have to see how that goes. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a cactus. It's an Ocotillo, and you can see the long kind of like sticks coming out of the ground, but at the very top you can just see they're starting to bloom. During the springtime, this whole desert comes to life because of the winter rains, and we're about ready to see the desert come into bloom. But one thing you'll notice about desert plants is that they have very small leaves, if leaves at all, and spines. And the two things that they need to survive is water, and they need the sunlight, which is plenty of sunlight here, but the water is something that is very crucial for all these plants. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how these plants get their water. Okay, so if you look closely, you'll see the plant has all these little tiny leaves and all these little spikes, okay? And the leaves are tender on the Ocotillo, which means that they could be eaten by an animal, but because of all the spikes, they're not. And those leaves are super important because that's how the plant actually transpires, meaning how it inhales and exhales, to use another term. The roots of this plant are not right here. They go into the base base of the plant. These roots can spread out maybe 30 or 50 feet out in all directions. And the reason is that the desert is dry most of the year. This desert gets 2.2 to 2.5, that's like 2.5 inches of rain per year. But when it comes in a huge torrent. There'll be a huge big rain and then nothing for months and months and months. So all that water goes right into the soil and goes deep into the soil, and there it's stored. There's a lot of water, but it's deep under the soil, and that's where this plant goes. So to compete for that water, it spreads out roots in all directions for 30 or 50 feet, and all these plants are doing exactly the same thing. They're dormant right now, but they're going to be kicking into their life cycle, producing their seeds, making the flowers, which then produce the seeds, and then dispersing those seeds to try to make new plants. And this is the Ocotillo, and it's a very beautiful plant here at Anza Borrego Desert. Okay, so if you look closely, you'll see the plant has all these little tiny leaves and all these little spikes, okay? And the leaves are tender on the Ocotillo, which means that they could be eaten by an animal, but because of all the spikes, they're not. And those leaves are super important because that's how the plant actually transpires, meaning how it inhales and exhales, to use another term. The roots of this plant are not right here. They go into the base of the plant. These roots can spread out maybe 30 or 50 feet out in all directions. And the reason is that the desert is dry most of the year. This desert gets 2.2 to 2.5, that's like 2.5 inches of rain per year. But when it comes in a huge torrent. There'll be a huge big rain and then nothing for months and months and months. So all that water goes right into the soil and goes deep into the soil, and there it's stored. There's a lot of water, but it's deep under the soil, and that's where this plant goes. So to compete for that water, it spreads out roots in all directions for 30 or 50 feet, and all these plants are doing exactly the same thing. They're dormant right now, but they're going to be kicking into their life cycle, producing their seeds, making the flowers, which then produce the seeds, and then dispersing those seeds to try to make new plants. And this is the Ocotillo, and it's a very beautiful plant here at Anza Borrego Desert. All right, so we're right here, and we're looking at what is called a creosote bush. The creosote bush is a desert plant that's not only important to the animals that live in this area, but it's also important to us as people because we use some of the plant to help us with our lives in the city. If you've ever been to a telephone pole and seen kind of that black stuff that they kind of oozes out of them, the wooden ones, a lot of that's creosote, and creosote is a chemical that they infuse into the wood of a telephone pole because it keeps the termites out. And so those animals, the termites, don't like to burrow into the wood, and that's important because obviously we don't want these big poles laying all over our neighborhood to be falling down on top of us during a strong windstorm. So the creosote bush is super important. But if you look, the beautiful yellow flowers, it's just about ready to come into bloom, how green and lush it is. And a lot of animals rely on these on the berries and the fruits from the creosote bush. But I also wanted to talk about across the way here. If you look, you'll see a big wall of trees, and what that is, those are lemon trees. And we're going to talk about how can all these green, lush lemon trees, how does this big orchard find its way to a desert that only gets about 2 inches of rain a year? We'll talk about that in a second. All right, the answer to that question about the lemon trees is, one of them is right behind us. This is a well. Notice the big kind of gray thing goes down into the ground, maybe hundreds of feet, who knows. And what it does is it taps in to that groundwater, the water that's stored underneath the soil from the rains, and then it's drawn up through the pump and then pumped out to where it's needed, out maybe the orchards, but also the homes and the cities of Borrego. That is a big problem out here in Borrego because they have been draining this underwater source of water, which they call an aquifer. It's like an underground lake, and they've been draining that for decades, if not more, and it's almost used up. They're using so much water that actually the land around here is actually sinking a little bit. So it's super important that we manage this resource, and the water that's being pumped out is not being replenished by enough water coming in, because the sandy soil of the desert is so porous, is so loose, that any kind of water that falls on it goes right through and down into the lower soil. So if you get a big rain, a lot of that water gets inside and it drops down into the aquifer, pulling up much more water than the rain's putting in. So it's a problem here in the desert, so we got to manage that better. This is a giant sloth. Desert plant is a tree, and this is what is known as the Palo Verde tree. And the Palo Verde tree is a plant that, once again, has very small leaves, and the leaves are actually not on this plant right now, but the leaves are so small, and it'll drop its leaves during the winter time, and then in the spring it'll grow these very small leaves. But if you look at the wood of the Palo Verde tree is green, so that's hence the name Palo Verde tree. Okay guys, so we are here at the Anza Borrego Visitor Center actually, and you can kind of see the area back here. So that's where the Visitor Center is. Closed right now because of the COVID thing going around, but the important thing is here we talked about as Anza Borrego as a high desert, and way out in the distance you can see the kind of ridge line out there, and on the other side of that is the Mojave Desert. And the Mojave Desert includes the Salton Sea, which is actually one of the lowest places you can go. It's below sea level. It's out on the other side of that ridge line, and being a high desert is a whole another different type of habitat for plants and animals in this area that you won't see on the other side of that ridge line. That ridge line is a high heat desert or a high pressure desert, and even though some rain might get over the mountains here every once in a while, not as much even goes into that area. So it's a very hot, dry, humid area from the Salton Sea, but that it gets very little rain, and it's a very unique area. So that would be the low desert. So we're here up in the high desert, and just over that ridge in the Mojave Salton Sea area is the low desert. All right, so up in the canyon there's a natural spring that feeds the canyon, and during the torrential rains it's actually dangerous because large boulders, maybe the size of a car, can come tumbling down from the upper mountains. So once they get dislodged by the erosion underneath them, they can just come tumbling down. And when you walk up the canyon, you'll see boulders that are much taller than I am. I'm 6 feet tall, and they'll be like 10, 15 feet tall boulders that have been coming down that canyon. And that's part of the erosive process. But these plants seem to adapt, and they'll just grow around it and just wait for the next rain. You can see here around a lot of these cactus stands, that's what they call a group of cactus. you'll see these burrows, these little holes in the ground, and that's what happens. The animals, they burrow into the ground and they kind of find their way in and amongst the roots of the cactus, and they can either eat those roots, or they can also use those to help them create their little house. Alright guys, so this is what they call a desert fir, and it's actually not a conifer. It's not a pine tree. A lot of times, fir trees are referred to as pine trees. But if you look closely at the leaf structure looks very much like a pine tree. So this is why they call it the desert fir. All right, so what you see here is a Palo Verde tree, and in the background we saw a little dove flying around. But they've been doing some maintenance in the park, and you can see how they've been laying the limbs and the branches here. In the natural area of the park, if you have an area where there are a bunch of limbs and things kind of stacked up, a lot of times what you'll do is you'll find what's called a rat's nest in there. They have this animal that lives in the park. It's called a kangaroo rat, and the kangaroo rat will live in these bushes and stuff because it gives them protection. And it's kind of an interesting thing. They just kind of live from place to place, and then they make their burrows out of branches and sticks. All right, guys, so this is a different type of plant. It's called a sage, and this plant in particular is called a lipstick sage, and if you look closely, the flowers look like the color of lipsticks. Okay guys, so we're out here in the Anza Borrego Desert. We talked about this being what they call a high desert. High desert is a desert that occurs over the 1,000-foot altitude, and this definitely qualifies for a high desert. But if you look out there, you'll see this long ridge, this kind of sloping mountain out there. Just on the other side of that is the area that we call the Mojave Desert. We're going to be going down into what they call the Salton Sea, and Salton Sea actually is below sea level, and that is a low desert, and the high pressure that forms over that desert on a regular basis keeps the rain away, and it even gets a little bit less rain than the rain shadow desert here at Anza Borrego. One of the ways that we know that there are animals in the park is they come down at night or when people aren't around, and they wander through the park. And some of the animals they have here, they could deer, but the bighorn sheep is kind of a big deal up here in this area. You'll see up in the mountains every once in a while, you'll see them, and it looks like perhaps this could be a track of a bighorn sheep right here, but who knows. But that's how we kind of know that animals are in the park, by looking at their tracks.